Welcome to the Impact Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Pritchard. This is a podcast where we dive deep into the real, uncensored truths about addiction, recovery, and everything in between. No sugarcoating, no judgment, just honest conversations that can help lift up the solution. Let's get started. Today, I'm very excited. We have Bryan Stickney here with us. He is the owner of Buckhead Therapy Solutions. How are you?
I am very good. How are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I was saying earlier, appreciate you making the trip up north because you live in Buckhead, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
So
not a problem.
Yeah. And we were getting set up and Christian was asking if you've ever been on a podcast, and this is your first one,
This
right?
is number one here.
So exciting.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, today I really wanted to get into your history, of course, and your experience, and then kind of what you do today and what you see and maybe some trends and misconceptions and things like that, because you have a lot of experience in the field, in the addiction space or substance abuse space. You've worked at a couple treatment centers, and now you have your own practice. So I think you'll have a lot to share that can be helpful to our listeners if that works.
Yeah, of course. No, I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. And so just to give people a little bit of a background, you are in recovery as well.
Yep.
Which is amazing. And give us a little, I guess, look into your childhood overview. I think I always like to ask this question because we all have different upbringings.
Right.
And I think there's just some misconceptions around that. There's certain things that could maybe cause this or that. So maybe if you wouldn't mind just sharing like a little bit about your childhood.
Of course. No, I mean, that's always a fascinating topic. And you hear so much about like that ACEs study. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, the adverse childhood experiences. So my story really does not align. I don't meet really any of those criteria. So I grew up with just about everything I could ever have asked for. Had a great childhood, great friend group. Played sports. Had a really good upbringing. And it wasn't until high school where I started to experience some social anxiety and wanted to fit in, and that kind of steered me towards doing some things that my peers were doing, and that's kind of how my relationship with alcohol and substances originated. And, I've got family members that have struggled with this, like my grandfather, my uncle. But I was never like freaked out by it or anything. I just kind of started experimenting and took it from there.
Yeah.
So no crazy like trauma, fortunately, in my life. I'm very grateful for that. But there was nothing that was like, okay, this guy's walking a path right towards addiction.
Right. Yeah. And that was my experience too. I had a very, typical upbringing. Nothing severely traumatic happened to me in my life. And so when I was very ignorant to what this is, and so of course, when I was going through my stuff, I'm like, well, no, I could never be an alcoholic. Like, absolutely not. Like, that wasn't even in my vocabulary,
right.
Nor was I going to let that even come into my mind.
Right. Yeah, similar with me. I mean, high school, I think there were maybe some subtle signals. Like I'd be the last one awake a lot, and but I didn't think that was problematic. I thought it was very normal at the time, and even into college, thought it was normal. So it obviously, this is a progressive condition, and it certainly is the case in my story. But in the beginning, it was relatively tame, I would say.
Yeah. And you went to University of Alabama.
I did. Roll
which
Tide.
I forgot about that. And then I saw your tag, and I was like, oh yeah, Roll Tide.
Yep. So I'm an Alabama graduate and huge football fan. Tuscaloosa can be a dangerous place, though, if you let it. Yeah.
And so how did you do in college? Were you blending in with the rest of the party crowd, would you say?
For a little bit in the beginning. So I joined a fraternity, and, the culture there certainly can be a lot of alcohol use, some drug use, and I'd started some drug use in high school, so that wasn't really anything new to me. There were some new substances that came on board. Xanax was really a bad one for me. That ended up being kind of my drug of choice and ultimately kind of took me out. But we can get more into that if you'd like. But no, I'd say freshman year, you get all the new freedom with no parents and you just kind of get to do your thing. And I took advantage of that and sometimes took it a little bit over the top. But even freshman year, like my grades were okay. Usually could maintain some A's and some B's academically and, show up to class most of the time and just do what I need to do to skate by.
Yeah.
Certainly left a lot on the table academically, but, did the bare minimum at least. And it wasn't really until like end of sophomore year into junior year where things started to like get pretty ugly.
Yeah. And when you were in college and partying and all those things, do you remember like when you didn't have anything in your system, kind of how you felt? Because a lot of people are like, I didn't feel good in my own skin, or, like our text talks about restless, irritable, discontent, that kind of stuff.
That's a great question. I mean, I mentioned having, a little bit of social anxiety in high school. And, obviously the drinking and some of the substance use made me at that time feel more a part of the crowd and doing things that the people I wanted to spend time with were doing too. And I think that amplified when I got to college. I went to a pretty small private high school in Atlanta. And then when I got to Tuscaloosa, I was, oh my God, there's a ton of people here, a ton of new people. So that opened my eyes a lot. And I think that kind of went to the next step. And gosh, well, I got to be at least a little drunk to socialize with all these new people. So not feeling great in my skin, like when I'd be sober during the day, if I would see somebody in class, it'd be a very small, short conversation. The confidence level was certainly not where I wanted it to be. Mm-hmm. And then I'd get, 4 or 5 drinks in and it'd be a completely different story.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't stop at 4 or 5 drinks,
right.
Of course.
Right. And that's where it gets tricky with the alcoholic and the addict, because you get in that sweet spot of where it's working and you have the confidence like you're talking about, but we have no control over the consumption, unfortunately. Right. And so then we, miss the mark a lot.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I like to say that, alcohol and addiction does not care about intentions. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was not a single time where I ever was like, all right, tonight I'm going to go blackout, get in a fight, strain relationships, cause a bunch of havoc in my life that I got to wake up the next day and navigate all the guilt and shame associated with that. So never did I plan on that.
Yes.
But unfortunately, that's what happened too often.
I say this like something similar. Like, it was never my intention to wake up in the hospital.
Yeah.
But when I, when we pick up that first drink, you're not like, oh yeah, I want to go get in a bar fight and do this and that. Right. We believe it's going to be a good time. Yeah. Because it does so much for us.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of times it wasn't every time I went out was it some catastrophe, but like, let's say I went out 10 times, probably 4 of them would be. And that's not a good ratio.
Yeah.
Because it was a lot of fun. Even the nights where it would turn into a bad night, before that, it would be a good time.
Right.
And you're connecting and all that. But then the consequences really just start to add up over time.
Yeah. And it's funny because, it's not funny, but kind of funny that it's just crazy that we will look at like, well, there were those few times I went out and I held it together. Whereas like the normal drinker may have a few times they overdrank and went too far. And then they're like, maybe had a Jaeger and like, I will never drink Jaeger again. And they won't.
Yeah.
Or they overdrink and they're like, I will never do shots again. And they don't. Yeah. Whereas we're the opposite. We have more times that we are so out of control versus when we are in control.
Yeah, it's dead on. I think some of those like guilty feelings the next day, I'll never do that again, might last a couple of days. Yeah. And then we're right back.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so you're in college and it's progressing, obviously, and then walk us through that a little bit.
I was in a relationship towards the end of sophomore year, very toxic. That lasted about 1.5 years, and codependent. We would just like a lot of nights when we wouldn't go out, we would just sit in bed and drink and watch TV. It was not a healthy situation. Yeah, so as things kind of progressed, it was just more consistent drinking, more consistent blacking out, more consistent repercussions where reputationally things started to turn and people would kind of perceive me as a liability. And even people that like were my best friends in high school that also went to Alabama started to be like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah.
So that's when I really started to have even more of that kind of shame and guilt and didn't know what to do about it and became very depressed, isolated a ton. Like I would be in my room watching Netflix unless I was going to class occasionally or going out. Like I wouldn't leave my room unless I was, like I said, class or using.
Yeah.
And it was ugly. I mean, it was really ugly.
And were you using Xanax at the same time too?
Yeah. So the Xanax, the first time I took it was in college. And the first time I took it, you know, as I mentioned, social anxiety, just kind of generalized anxiety too, were problems for me. It's so effective. It's confidence in a pill. And I took that and I was like, what the hell is this? And so from that point forward, I tried to have my hands on that stuff as often as I could.
Yeah.
And as I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, and you know, you combine that with alcohol, it is not a good recipe.
Yeah, I know. Well, and that's what I was thinking. Like, I'm sure it was a doozy.
and then, of course, my insanity, you know, when I got out of college, and I'm skipping over some things, like I went to treatment in between this, but when I got out of college, because I was having my own money, I worked in the insurance industry for like 4 years after undergrad. I just bought Coke to avoid that issue. Yeah. You know? So, okay, well, this is my blackout solution. And then the next day, I'll just continue to eat the Xanax and no hangover. And that kind of became my existence, you know, 3-4 days each week. And it was ugly. Yeah. You know?
So when you went to treatment the first time, I'm assuming that was probably your parents or somebody ripped you out of college and was like, hey, you need some help.
Yeah, so I was living with like 5 other guys, and one of the guys I lived with was one of my close friends in high school, and he was having a big SEC championship party at his house here in Atlanta. And I showed up there, like a bunch of parents were there too. My parents, that was the first time they had really... I'd seen a couple other things, but really were like, good Lord, this is a problem. And some of my friends had approached me previously leading up to this, and I just responded with utter denial. Oh, you've never blacked out before? Like, come on, you know, just putting it back on them. But my parents were like, look, so I finished my semester. I was supposed to graduate in the summer. I had like 6 more hours or something. And they said, not so fast. So I was in treatment. I knew it wasn't good. And this was maybe to check some boxes. But I went to a place out in Lubbock, Texas, and was there for 45 days and then did a 3-month sober living after that. And I was superficially compliant the whole time, you know, kind of knew I was going to drink again. I was 21 or 2 at that point. So checked all the boxes, but as soon as they dropped me off at the airport to go home, I beelined it to the bar. Yeah. 2 double Bloody Marys, jugged, and got back to it.
And so it's interesting because maybe family members that are listening, they're like, you were there for 45 days, you did sober living for 3 months. I mean, it sounds like you got an A+ in treatment. And then you're drinking on the way home. Do you remember feeling a certain way, or was it kind of just like auto drive where you're just like going and it like is naturally you just like aren't even thinking and you're just ordering drinks?
You know, I think the consequences had not, and I got arrested a couple times in college, but I think the consequences still were not like sufficient to really have me understand that this is not a sustainable way of living. So I think the whole time I was just like, I can't wait to drink again. Yeah. And when I had the opportunity, the first thing I did was that. Yeah. And there for a little while, like, so I lived back at home with my parents for like 6 months, the rest of whatever that fall semester was. And then I returned to Alabama to get my degree and had manipulated them into a system where like I'd be getting drug tested randomly, but they were, I guess, okay with me drinking. And I did okay. Like I got a 4.0 that semester, did pretty well, like had a lot of fun. But as we've already hit on, like this thing's progressive and it did it again.
Yeah. I mean, because I was the same way when I went to treatment. I did everything that was asked of me for the most part. I shared in groups. I participated. But there was no thought in my mind that I was never not going to drink again. I just really was like, I'm going to get people off my back. I am not going to get the way it was. Like now I'm detox. It's out of my system. I won't let it get to that point again. Like all these delusional things. And I didn't know I didn't even have control over any of that.
Yeah.
And so when I got out, it was a couple days and it was game on.
It's not that time in treatment was just an utter waste of time and money and resources, because I definitely learned a lot. It was my first exposure to the program, but I remember like one of my first meetings, I'm going through the promises and I was like, that's a load of shit. Like, just absolutely not. And it's funny that now that I'm living them, it's incredible to experience.
Yeah.
So I definitely, I was like, all right, I'm never taking Xanax again. I'm never doing X, Y, and Z again. And sure, that might have sustained for a little while, and then it didn't.
Yeah. Well, and I think like as our parents or family members or friends, they're like, just don't drink as much. And if you're not doing the Xanax, then you'll be okay. Or, if just whatever, because drinking obviously is a very social thing and many people do it and there's no problem with it. And so it's almost like everybody wants it to work out for us to be able to drink normally.
I think it's more convenient if that's the case for all parties involved. Like, all right, he can show up and we don't have to change anything we're doing and all that. And it's funny now, like me being in sobriety, I never ever want anybody to change a single thing that they're doing if I'm present. Like, please do your thing. It's more uncomfortable if you don't.
Right.
I think you're right. But for me, that just was not an option.
Yes. Okay. So fast forward, you graduate, you're holding it together, and then you get into working, and that's when you found your little magic solution cocktail of sorts.
I was 22, maybe 23 when I got back home, and was working as an underwriter, like I said, in the insurance industry. And on paper, things were good because it was a pretty gradual progression. Like it wasn't in 6 months that I was, in a really deep, dark place. Like 4 years is actually when I got sober. So the cocktail was present, but maybe not as severe as the cocktail became at like 25, 26. And then I finally had an experience at work where it was like a Tuesday night, and I'd taken a girl out on a date, and she had left. I had walked myself. I lived in a townhome that was very close to a local bar that some people may be familiar with called Johnny's Hideaway.
Oh, how convenient.
I know. So I could walk to it, and I was there until it closed. And then I remember coming home, going to bed at like late, and woke up the next morning still intoxicated, and just walked down to my refrigerator. And this wasn't a typical thing for me to do, but I saw a beer in there. I was like, all right, I got to try to reach equilibrium here and like feel whatever. So I do that, drive to work. Terrible idea. Get there, my boss is like, Bryan, we can obviously tell something's off. Like, come back tomorrow and we'll sort through this.
Yeah.
And I was terrified. Work was, positioned as such a priority in my life because everything else was kind of not doing great. That when I started to feel potential professional repercussions, I walked out into the parking lot after that conversation and called my dad and was like, I need help. And, fortunately, they'd been doing their own work in the background since I went to treatment that first time, and big into Al-Anon. And I was on a plane flight the next day and back in treatment.
Wow. And so when, I guess, up to that night of Johnny's Hideaway, were you aware that it was getting bad?
Yeah. I knew, and I was always this guy that would put on a facade that everything's going incredibly. And whenever I'd see people, like, everything's awesome, blah, 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 just full of crap.
Yeah.
But yeah, I knew internally because I was depressed, anxious, and didn't like who I was. And what I was trying to achieve was find confidence and find connection, and wasn't achieving that, but I didn't know any other way.
Well, and it's so interesting because essentially your like moment of surrender was that situation with work, which nothing crazy really happened. It's just your boss was like, something's off, we'll figure this out. where you had been arrested before, you had had all these other consequences before, but for whatever reason, this moment was the one that caught your attention enough to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's so important because a lot of people talk about this like rock bottom situation, but it doesn't have to be this big, loud, I got arrested, I lost my house, I lost my family. It can be something as simple as you're potentially like not gonna lose your job or have a situation go on. It's this internal bottom, essentially.
And that wasn't my last drink.
Okay.
So at the bottom, I kept digging for a little bit. But so I went through this facility down in Florida. I did like 90 days there. In my withdrawal process, like I went through a detox before I started there, and that was incredibly eye-opening. I was taking a lot of benzodiazepines every day, and so I did like a 10-day detox, and I can remember because I felt fine there. They picked me up in a van, took me to the treatment facility. I took a nap, and when I woke up from the nap, it was like I was in a completely different world, and the most anxiety I'd ever felt by a long shot. Like I could not look people in the eye. I could not, eat. I could not sleep. And that sustained for like the first, it got better, week to week, but the first 3 weeks to a month I was there. And that was really illuminating just as far as how much damage I'd done to my body. And, so that caught my attention. But that also had me physically present in treatment, but not really participating, just because I was terrified of everything.
Yeah.
And now around all new people that I don't know, and it's just like, what the hell is going on? So anyway, I get through that 90 days. I moved back home, and I'd owned a condo at this point, had a roommate who had also gone to treatment while I was in treatment. So I returned home, and it was just me. And I would say the aftercare planning was not as strong as it needed to be. And I got home, very loosely followed their suggestions, would go to an occasional meeting, got a sponsor, but didn't really work hard. And after like 4 or 5 months of just getting miserable, like feeling a lot of self-pity, all my friends are doing this and I can't even go do X, Y, and Z, said, F it, this is what happened. So I finally was like, okay, I'm gonna drink. I'm gonna go buy a 6-pack, and that's gonna be it. So I get four drinks in, and I'm on the phone with my drug dealer, immediately back to the same cocktail that I used to do, and it happened like that. So as soon as my frontal lobe became impaired, I knew it could be better, and that's what I went and executed on. And that turned into a 4-day, really ugly, not remembering a whole lot, of a relapse. And my real bottom was, so my dad, he and my mom, they're members at a country club that I was not supposed to be at because I had aged out or whatever. And I decided to go over there. I was going to hit some golf balls, hit like 2, and went straight to the men's locker room and got into like a yelling altercation with some guy. And apparently it was not very pretty. So I don't know what happens after this, but the next day I wake up to a phone call from my dad crying. And he's like, Bryan, what the hell did you do?
Oh, man.
And I had no idea. All I could remember was walking onto the golf range after that blank.
Yeah.
So he had to inform me of all that stuff, and it turned into a very tearful conversation. And I can remember hanging up from that call and walking into my bathroom and just looking at myself in the mirror like, Bryan, what the hell are you doing?
Right.
So I went back to the detox here in Atlanta, and then went back to the same facility in Florida for like a tune-up. This is a 45-day thing. I did everything differently. I went to a meeting every single day. I listened to all their suggestions, got a sponsor while I was there. And the aftercare planning was very sound. This time around, I was on a SoberLink for a year after I got finished. Did all the stuff. And so my last drink was a 4 Loko in the car on the way to detox. And I won't ever forget it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was November 19th, 2017.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So amazing.
Yeah.
I also so of course, when you were talking, I didn't realize that the whole work situation was not going to be your last drink. But I also think it's important to point out in that moment, you asked for help.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the same experience where I asked for help to go to detox one time. And so I was like, surely if I'm the one that wants it, I will change. And there's still like more to that. Yes, like but like sometimes people get sober, they don't even want it. You just have to have that moment of like brokenness, like internal, like just like our book talks about incomprehensible demoralization, like feel it to your core. And it sounds like obviously going to the country club and doing that is like the last thing you would ever want to do. You clearly care about your parents. You care about something that they're a part of. You don't want to, harm them. And I think that's important to point out too. Like we're not ever most times we're not trying to harm anybody. But unfortunately, people just get...
It's part of it.
Yeah.
It's part of it, unfortunately. I was able to take the GRE this second go around in treatment and had decided, what I'd been doing before was certainly not all that fulfilling, and had been in therapy for, a while, and had always been fascinated with the person in the other chair, and was like, look, I think that could be a really rewarding and meaningful career path. And like I said, took the GRE when I was in treatment and teed myself up for grad school and started grad school. And the rest is kind of fallen into place. And it's been an unbelievable journey.
So you said you had been in therapy. Mm-hmm. And obviously just therapy wasn't working, right?
Right.
Yeah. And therapy is so important and so amazing. And I guess I'll ask you this, like, how do you share with someone that you're helping the separation of the two, but how both of them together can be so powerful? What does that look like, and what advice do you give people when they're in that place of not knowing if they're an addict or not knowing if they're an alcoholic?
Yeah. So, self-disclosure, you've got to kind of tread lightly with that. But around addiction, I will self-disclose because I think if it's appropriate clinically, of course. But I do find that it sort of automatically creates this like connection of this person understands, this person's been through some things. So I have the luxury of, being in an outpatient setting where it's just me and I can kind of operate how I feel like is most helpful. I will start people that are kind of on that ambivalent place where maybe they've had some consequences. So I'm like, all right, let's come up with a moderation plan. Like let's we'll collaborate on that and just see what feels realistic to them. So, all right, let's go have, 4 drinks 3 nights a week and see how you do there.
Yeah.
And we'll give you 2 weeks of a sample size to be able to do that. They'll come back. Yeah, I was able to do it. It was great. Feeling better, feeling a sense of achievement. Awesome. Perfect. Let's keep that up. And I'd say 95% of the time, that ultimately is not adhered to. And then the conversation really starts to develop where we can, what do you want to do about this?
Right.
Encourage every single person that's coming into my office for addiction, because I treat, not just addiction, but please go try AA. At least 5 meetings, and then you'll have enough, potentially information to conclude one way or another.
Yeah.
And because it's it helps millions of people every single day.
Yes.
So why would we not try it?
Right. For me, I don't know if I was just like, I've said this before, but like in movies and shows, it's so sad, and there's like a small little circle and somebody's crying and it's like, why in the world would I want to be a part of something like that? Like any sort of 12-step fellowship, going to meetings, like absolutely not. No, thank you. That's not fun. And as you mentioned earlier, talking about the promises, where in our text it talks about just all these incredible things that can happen when we actually are working a program of recovery, but you don't know that until you actually have your own experience with it.
Yeah. I was in a session earlier today with a guy I've been working with for 3 years. When I first started working with him, his wedding had been called off. His now wife had called off the wedding because he was having a really hard time. And so he is going to be celebrating 3 years of sobriety in July. And he's married. He had a daughter 2 months ago. And just to get to watch these transformations happen. And we were talking about the promises earlier in session today. And it's just a really special thing to get to be a part of and witness and maybe help facilitate a little bit. It's incredible.
Yeah. And I also, how you're like, hey, go try AA or 12-step fellowship or something, because that's really when you know that you're at the end of the road.
Yeah.
When like professionals are
Correct.
like, hey, go check this out.
It's a hard sell. I mean, because people are like, that's really admitting that something's wrong. And when you're talking about like the stigma from like movies and stuff, I've had to address that very notion in sessions a lot. It's like, look, don't let that kind of stain your impression. Like, please just go experience it. It is not that.
Right. I know. You would think by now they would have enough.
I've seen some better ones lately, some more accurate depictions.
Yeah.
But there's definitely some where it's like, I'll look at my wife if we're watching a movie. I'm like, no.
Yeah. I guess when you decided you wanted to go into this space, were you focused mainly on substance abuse, or was there anything else that, like, mental health in general? Like, what led?
Yeah. I mean, so my story involving both addiction and co-occurring depression, anxiety, which is almost always the case that it's co-occurring with something. Yeah. My goal from the get-go was to be in private practice at some point, but it was really neat that the first organization that I worked for out of grad school was where I went to treatment. They had a regional outpatient here in Atlanta, and I was the lead adolescent therapist there for about a year. So it couldn't have been better. I walked straight out of grad school into this role with the organization that, helped save my life. I'm working with addiction and co-occurring stuff. And then somebody that I had worked under when I was with Skyland Trail as part of my graduate school clinical practicum, he called me one day. I was not looking to leave. It's Karen, which is where I went to treatment. I was not looking to leave Karen, but this guy called me and he's like, hey, and it's a group practice in the Buckhead area. He said, hey, we're looking at bringing on another therapist. Like, would you be interested? And I was like, absolutely. So I got that job and I transitioned over there and was in that practice for about 3 years. And then I opened my own in January of 24, and it's been a best decision I've ever made.
Yeah. With your experience, like I would think you would be considered like a high functioning addict, alcoholic, because you were going to work, you were somewhat having a life.
Right.
Do you work with a lot of those types of
Big
people?
Time. Yeah.
And so I guess, like, what are some patterns that you see in those? Because I think those are sometimes the ones that are harder to spot, is when we are actually getting up and living somewhat of a life.
A lot of the things that I'll kind of inquire around in an assessment or something is like, how are your relationships? Like, what's your current relationship with alcohol? They'll maybe tell me, and I'll fish a little bit for any guilt associated with their relationship with alcohol, potentially shame. Because oftentimes, the folks I'm working with are married. So you kind of see how the relationship's going with their spouse. If they have kids, how do they feel like they're parenting? So those are some of the themes that I can kind of pick up on and maybe guide a little bit using some specific techniques that illuminate to them, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
Maybe there is a common denominator to some of the challenges that I've been having. And so that will kind of open the conversation up and we go from there. But that's one profile, obviously. And then with the younger people, I'll treat down to 14. So, I'm seeing a lot of this gas station weed stuff. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Psychosis is scary. So it's a lot of trends. Gambling has become absurd. It's all over the place. I've got a patient that is 14 years old and has accrued $150,000 in debt.
Oh my God.
At 14.
That is insane.
Yeah.
And scary.
Very scary.
Yeah.
Very scary.
Do you work with people that don't have substance abuse?
I do. Yeah.
And so with them, I'm curious if they're experiencing depression or anxiety, they're not probably having these experiments with alcohol and drugs and things like that. And I guess kind of what I'm trying to get at is, how an addict and an alcoholic and a normal drinker can experience both the same symptoms of things, but how they have completely different lives around like the substance. Like a lot of times if someone is in like a deep depression, they just like, don't eat, don't drink, don't do anything.
Right.
And with us, it's like, no, that fuels it more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, oftentimes what I see with a depressive presentation is a lot of isolation, a lot of avoidance, which usually comes with some anxiety too. And then it just kind of reinforces this nasty cycle of like, just poor self-worth, poor self-esteem, I'm inadequate, whatever. When I'm treating depression, I think initially behavior activation is such an important piece of the puzzle. And the research backs, that it like exercise and just getting out and being around people is incredibly effective for like mild depressive symptoms.
Yeah.
So I start there. But if somebody is also navigating some substance use challenges, because people will cope with that, obviously, we've got to get that in check too. So that we'll certainly discuss that. So it adds a layer of complexity to the case if somebody's also, having a co-occurring addiction problem.
Yeah, I think that's good to know because people will want to hear kind of differences to look out for, especially family members or loved ones. We have a lot of families that listen in. And I mean, I know for me, like, I didn't have any experience with addiction before mine got bad, so I didn't know anything about it. My family didn't. We didn't really have anyone in my family that I know of, like directly, that had it. So no one knew what to do,
Right.
and it's a very hard thing to navigate.
Yeah.
And like I remember my mom taking me to my primary care doctor, being like, "What do we do?" And he was like, "She needs to go to AA and she needs to go to treatment, and here's like a couple that y'all can look at."
So much of what I do, especially in the younger population, is education. I mean, it's families getting involved. What the hell's going on? What do we do? And oftentimes they're doing what they feel like is inherently the right thing, but it's actually enabling behavior. We're fixing, we're doing things for them.
Yeah.
And that just, continues the vicious cycle. Families Anonymous, Al-Anon, please go get exposed to some of that stuff. You're going to learn a ton of what to do and what not to do and what's helpful and what's not.
Right.
And, so I'm doing a ton of family work as well because you have to.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yes. And I mean,
Spouses too. I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. And there's so many dynamics and there's so much resentment, and that's something, not to talk about impact too much, but we do a family program there because the families have their own things going on that they need to work through.
Yeah.
And a lot of times families are like, well, I'm not the one with all the chaos and everything. Like, I've kept him alive,
Right.
or, or the wife, like, I'm doing all the kid things and, all the things. It's so many dynamics. And if family members, and you can maybe speak to this, but like if families can actually get some help and relief and freedom around it, it gives the addict a better shot at getting better.
Oh, yeah. We call it the parallel process. I mean, not only will it help the addict, but it'll also help the family member feel better themselves. So I'm often encouraging, because it's such a damaging and stressful and anxiety-inducing and terrifying thing, hey, have you ever thought about getting therapy for yourself to work through some of these things, to work through some of the, potential catastrophizing going on in your mind and all that? So when everybody's working towards the same path, it is increasing the likelihood tremendously of, sustained healing. And so, yeah, you're dead on. The family component is critical.
And I think the families, it takes time, obviously, for the families to gain that trust back. And so,
Big time.
Yeah. And so, and personally, like, was that something that was hard for you to gain your parents' trust back, or was it? What did that look like? I guess.
My use was mostly done out of the house, and so they were never exposed directly to like the severe nature of it. So certainly trust was breached, but I think what really helped rebuild it was that SoberLink device. I'm a big advocate for that, or any other kind of measurable accountability structure, because it's going to send objective data that, hey, he's not consuming alcohol. here's the evidence. And then you keep showing up. I did it for a year. And so you keep showing up, and then I just kind of organically, okay, we can kind of get back to just being.
Yes.
And my relationship with my family, which has really, fortunately, always been meaningful and special, has just gotten even better.
Yeah.
Even better than I ever imagined it could. And for my wife to have never seen me intoxicated is kind of a wild concept.
Yeah.
We've got a 1-year-old son.
Amazing.
I hope that if this, lifestyle continues for me, he'll never have to see that or deal with that. So it's the ultimate blessing. I mean, it really is.
And I'm curious, when they had you doing the Sober Link, or I've talked a lot with the Sober Safe people. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they seem good too. But were you resistant, or were you just like, that's fine?
I was okay with it because at that point, there was another experience that I had when I went back to treatment that third time, where I got into the van that they would drive us to and from the clinical building in, and all the senses, like the smells, all of it hit me, and I was like, what am I doing here again? And it just further drove some motivation. So at that point I was like, no, I do it,
Yeah.
And it really, it's a helpful layer of support, because if you just got that one, oh God, I'll fail that, and then it'll screw up stuff. And it's good to have.
That's kind of a green flag that you were not, because if it was maybe the second time you'd gone treatment or the first time, you would have been like, no, I'm fine, defensive. Correct. And so for you to just be like, yes, that's fine. I don't do it. And you have that. And then I'm assuming you were also working a program of recovery along with the extra layer of accountability.
Yep.
And so I would also go as far to assume that if you were not working a program and still just wearing the bracelet, you may or may not be sober.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the program was nothing but enhancing to everything that I already had going on.
Yeah.
Psychologically, and gratitude has played a significant role just in my recovery. And I just had a different relationship with my higher power, and I think so many things just kind of lined up there, fortunately in a relatively short period, that it got not easy, certainly, but it just was so much better than the way I was living. I kept doing it.
Well, and that's so important to point out, because it's we have these little tiny experiences as we're working the steps or program, or going to participating in this community. We're having these little positive experiences, which propelled me to continue, because okay, well, what else can we do here? Know?
Yeah, I mean, it's I look at it, it's not compounding interest, but it does compound. Okay, here's a win, here's a win, here's a win. And when things just over time continuously fall into place in your life, it's well, why is that? I've changed a lot of things, but here's probably one of the biggest ones, overtly, that I've changed.
Yeah.
There's something to that.
Yeah. And then, like you said, today you're married. You have a 1-year-old little boy. We were talking about, because our boys were in the parking lot before this, climbing on top of Adam's truck. So, you have this to look forward to. But it's just amazing. Could you have imagined that your
Absolutely
life would be this?
Not. I mean, if somebody, and I use this when I'm sharing my story, if somebody could have shared with me, let's call it 9 years ago, that my life would look the way that it does today, with the things that I have, the people in it, and that I would feel the way that I do internally, I would have said that is impossible. There is no world in which those are my truths.
Yeah.
And here I am.
Yeah.
So it's special.
That's amazing. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Sarah, this has been a lot of fun to get on here and hopefully provide some kind of value to somebody out there. And this is a treatable condition, which is the sad part of it, is so many people don't get it. And so ask for help. There are so many professionals and so many resources that you can be steered to, with so many good people, that you don't have to keep suffering. There's too many examples of the other side.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And thank you for tuning in to another episode. I hope today's conversation has inspired you, opened your mind, maybe even your heart a little bit. But remember, you're not alone. And if you found this episode helpful, share it with someone who needs to hear it. We'll have all the links below to Impact as well as to Bryan's practice. But until next time, keep making an impact. Bye, y'all.